Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavari Paschatya Deshatarine. The history and the activities of what went on during these 2 weeks of festivals, they're all described in the books. We collected for 40 years as many memories, as many anecdotes, and the itinerary of Srila Prabhupada. But this year, I wanted to discuss a very important subject, and that is Srila Prabhupada's heart. Because in Nectar Devotion, Prabhupada, he quotes one Sanskrit proverb. And that proverb is that from disappointment arises the greatest satisfaction. Now, I always wondered, in the contradictory symptoms of love, how can disappointment and satisfaction go together? I could never understand it. And I thought that maybe there was some mistake in the translation. But now, looking back at Srila Prabhupada and his life, I'm understanding how much disappointment Srila Prabhupada had to establish this temple. Coming to America, he had his stroke. He said that from that time, his health he always suffered ill health from 1967 onwards. He always had ringing in his ears and other types of symptoms after a stroke. And then he started in 1967 how to make a temple in Vrindavan. The first donor was Satsvarup Maharaj. He gave his full salary of $100 that month because Prabhupada wanted to establish a Vidyapit, a place of learning for his disciples. At that time it was only American disciples. He was writing back and forth to the Goswamis at the Radha Damodar temple, trying to get a parcel of land and hoping that they would allow him and his disciples to at least support and maintain the worship of Radha Damodar. But they refused. Then he sent Guru Das before all the other devotees came to Vrindavan. The devotees, when Prabhupada sent them in 1970, for 1 year, they didn't come to Vrindavan. They simply traveled all over India. But he sent Guru Das to try to get the Maharaja Bharatpur, that full Keshigat palace, to make a temple. That also fell through completely. So Prabhupada suffered a lot of disappointments in trying to establish the temple. Finally, after the 1 year of traveling, he brought his 40, 50 disciples here for the first time. And the Brijbasis were so proud of Srila Prabhupada that at the Modi Bhavan, this is big government established Bhavan here, they had a welcoming ceremony for him. And they poured out their hearts to Srila Prabhupada, that he is the true representative of Vrindavan, who spread the glories of Radha Krishna love all over the world. And these were Brijbasis, the highest citizens in this entire town. They were praising Srila Prabhupada, that you are our hometown hero, and we want to support you, and we want to help you establish a temple. And finally, this parcel of land was given by Gita Devi Saraf. Hopefully she'll be coming today. And then Prabhupada began the construction. He didn't even have a plan of what the temple would look like. But Krishna sent Saurabh, who wasn't even an architect, he was a fashion designer. And Prabhupada empowered him. He was a Bhakta Hans. And when he got initiated, 2 weeks after he met Prabhupada, Prabhupada told him his name, your name is Saurabh. And Hans, he said, Zorro? So he thought his name was Zorro, was a great Mexican bandit who used to help the poor people. For 2 weeks he didn't know what his name was even. So he did not pick up his pencil. He came here, lived in a little dirt hut with Gunarnava, who was the construction manager, and he didn't pick up his pencil. He just drew the entire temple in one sitting and sent it to Prabhupada. And he realized, because what the Delhi architects did was they made it at ground level. And we know what happens when it floods here. So he decided the temple had to be uplifted, but there was no money for filling. So he dug this courtyard, and with that sand, he uplifted where we're sitting right now. So ingenious. And at that time also, because now we had a sunken courtyard, he envisioned that we would have boat festivals here. So much thanks to the inspiration that Prabhupada gave his disciples, particularly Saurabh, and Prabhupada was always beating him. Faster, faster, why this mistake? Why so much money? And Shrudakirti was like, oh, Saurabh, he's always getting it so hard. But then he realized that actually that was the greatest mercy. Because when the spiritual master chastises, it means he loves the disciple most. So finally, from disappointment comes the greatest satisfaction. And in that part of the Nectar of Devotion, Prabhupada gives an example. He said the cowherd boys were searching for Krishna everywhere. They couldn't find him. And their faces were black, and their whole, everything had become pale on them because they couldn't find Krishna. And then suddenly, from a very far distance on a hill, they heard Krishna playing his flute. And they became jubilant again, and they ran to Krishna. So here we have the Krishna Balaram temple. Srila Prabhupada gave several reasons why he established Krishna Balaram as the central worshipable deities, particularly because Gaur-Nitai are not well known here in Vrindavan. We have many different sampradayas. But he wanted to show the world that Gaur-Nitai and Krishna Balaram are non-different. And by worshipping Gaur-Nitai, you get the mercy of Krishna Balaram. And without the mercy of Gaur-Nitai, you cannot approach Radha and Krishna. So very scientifically, spiritual, scientific conclusion, Prabhupada set up the 3 altars. In order to get the mercy of Srimati Radharani and Sri Krishna, we have to first worship Guru Gauranga. So all of us in our spiritual lives, we can remember that Sanskrit proverb, from disappointment arises the greatest satisfaction. We have to continue endeavoring to fulfill the orders of our spiritual master, and despite whatever dissatisfaction, whatever disappointment comes in our life, in 1974, when Srila Prabhupada walked into the gate and he saw that nothing was ready, Prabhupada explains in the next paragraphs that in a big city, when there are elephants and lights, it doesn't make much of an effect. But in a small cottage, when you have elephants and lights, everyone can see it. So Srila Prabhupada, he lived here in his little home here. There were just about 3 rooms at the time. And Prabhupada, he appeared to be deathly ill. We started the 24-hour kirtan at that time. He couldn't move without help. He couldn't eat for 2 weeks. All of the symptoms that we all thought that Prabhupada was going to leave out of this disappointment. He said it's because his disciples weren't chanting their 16 rounds, they weren't following the principles. This is the effect of the disciple upon the spiritual master. And we saw all of that. It was right there clearly in front of us. So we have to remember that in the pure heart of Srila Prabhupada, despite all disappointment, despite illness, despite everything, he endeavored to establish this temple. And by his love of Krishna Balaram, we're all sitting here today. Hare Krishna.